Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us for the afternoon session on the business track. And it's truly a pleasure and honor for me to be here to share with you some of our thoughts on getting past ideation, crossing the deployment chasm. And I think today morning, those of you who attended the keynotes, it's really exciting to see all the momentum, all the innovation that's happening in the industry. But all of that should lead to a bigger purpose, and we really need to see a lot of these technologies to get deployed in real networks, in real world, and that's what I'll be sharing with you. But before I do that, I'm Manish Singh with Tech Mahindra, and just a few quick words about Tech Mahindra in case you've not heard about us. We are a company that offers services primarily to service providers. We are doing roughly $4 billion in revenue, around 100,000 associates operating across 90 plus countries. And we do offer services in a number of verticals, but the biggest vertical for us is telecommunications. As it so happens, our pedigree is telecom. We started as a joint venture between British Telecom, BT, and Mahindra. And since then, we have grown, offering services to wireless service providers, ISPs, cable cos, as well as doing some greenfield deployments in Asia. And that gives us a comprehensive perspective in terms of the service providers' need. And I think as we are engaging with them, it's becoming clear that they feel that the network economics is getting challenged. We heard from John Donovan today morning, and we hear that across the board, that the traffic on the networks continue to double every 12 to 18 months, and the traditional appliance model is no longer sustainable, it does not scale, and the profitability for these networks is at risk. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because what we're seeing all this is consumer and enterprise-driven traffic, but what lies ahead, especially with Internet of Things, that's going to put even heavier demands on this infrastructure. And so this creates this need for looking at alternative technologies, alternative economies. And one of the things that we look at is the economies of homogeneity, which we have seen in the web-scale properties, the FANG groups, the Facebook, Amazons, the way they have gone about implementing their infrastructure, truly leveraging merchant silicon, COTS platform, and instead of creating vertically integrated appliances, really creating an infrastructure where the applications are truly decoupled. Now, what that has enabled them is to really innovate at the speed of software. And that has also then created some new economies for them in terms of the advantages. And if you look at from a traditional telco perspective, whether we look at from a CapEx lens or we look at from an OpEx lens, when you're managing tens of SKUs versus thousands of SKUs, I think it becomes very clear that you are going to have significant operational advantages. Or if you're managing tens of configs versus thousands of configs, well, again, from an operations perspective, you're going to have significant OpEx advantages. And that creates the opportunity for the service providers to embark on a purposeful transformation. Now, we at Tech Mahindra, we see this as a three-step transformation, going from the big iron, vertically integrated model, which is where we are today, and where the networks innovate at the speed of the vendor's roadmap, of their boxes, their appliances. Well, moving away from them, getting to a more horizontal, where you're decoupling the software from the underlying hardware, really bringing and leveraging the capabilities of virtualization and more, and start to innovate the infrastructure more at a speed of software. But we see beyond that, the need to get even looking at these network functions and moving away from these VNF models to a more microservices architecture, where we really need to rethink what the network functions are, where they need to be displayed, and really create these solutions which lend themselves for elastic scaling. Now, that has created a lot of excitement in the industry. But if we look at the market reality, And I tend to think of it as from initiation through ideation into implementation. Well, the great seminal paper that was published by leading service providers, it initiated the industry. We had the HC-SIG formed, and then we went into ideation where a lot of PoCs have been since then rolled out. We at Tech Mahindra, we did few, and I'll share some of the work we've been doing in this space. But the reality also is that we are almost stuck in ideation. And how do we go from ideation to implementation, for we rarely see large-scale deployments yet. And so the challenge for the industry is how do we cross the chasm? And I'm just using Jeff Moore's construct here of really looking at, and we've seen this with a number of technologies, right? There's been the hype that builds up, and then the question is, how do we get them to mainstream deployment? I think it would be fair for me to say that, I mean, this is somewhere where the industry is right now, where we're seeing a lot of good innovation and early adopters starting to adopt the technologies, doing some trials, start playing with it. We heard about Chord, and I'll share with you what Tech Mahindra is doing in Chord. We're seeing some trying out of things like M-Chord, A-Chord, etc., and that's great. But the real question is, how do we get it to really where the mainstream market is and get some of these solutions deployed? And there are some challenges around that. And the fundamental biggest challenge of that is there is no greenfield out there. There is an existing network. There is no rip and replace that's going to happen. And as we bring these innovative solutions, they need to be integrated and operationalized side by side with an existing network. And so how do we really operate hybrid networks? And how do we manage and operationalize hybrid network infrastructure? Then you have BSS, OSS operation solutions and stacks that are already there doing fulfillment, assurance, and more. And how do we transform and migrate those BSS, OSS solutions and more? Further on, I mean, moving from a physical to a virtual infrastructure brings a need to bring in new capabilities, whether it's around visualization or analytics, or for that matter, we've been hearing and talking a lot also about predictive analytics, but first putting the basics in place to really start to see the new virtualized infrastructure. How do we operate and manage at scale? That's the key. Tools, processes, again, how do we bring DevOps, kind of all these things need to be put in place. And last but not the least, I think in this conference and this summit, there's a lot of obviously talent that is building and bringing this innovation. But if we look at the industry at large, there is a critical shortage around the skill set as well, around this particular new technologies. And how do we fix that to really drive scale and speed up the transformation? So we at Tech Mahindra, we have established a center of excellence. We are investing in SDN and NFV with the key focus to bring some key capabilities to the industry around design and development capabilities, most importantly, systems integration. That's what we've been doing, that's what we do for a living, but in the new world around virtualized infrastructure, that means a whole lot of new things. And then testing and certification, because we do think that there's a need to, again, speed up the overall transformation. Now, each of these are paired with some of the key enablers and things that we are doing already to really enable that. So, for example, for open source enablement, we have been doing a lot of work around some of the application development, and I'll share with you some of the applications, for example, we have developed on Open Daylight as an SDN controller, some either infrastructure applications or monetization applications. Similar work we're doing on Chord, and I'll share with you what we're doing there. But also bringing in toolkits like OpenFlow Agent Toolkit to really drive the adoption of OpenFlow. Now, as I said, I think systems integration, I think that's the key here, because as we again move from physical network functions to a virtualized infrastructure, really bringing that scale to drive the systems integration. And so what we're doing is two things. One, building a strategic ecosystem across the stack, from infrastructure to VNF managers, management orchestration, SDN controllers, etc. Two, we have wholeheartedly embraced open innovation. So working with OpenStack to Open Daylight, ONS, and more. And then third key thing, on the testing and certification. So we're putting a reference lab in place, which we have already put in partnership with the likes of Dell, Red Hat, and others. But we are also embarking on a journey to create certification program, because one of the things we see is how do we speed up the transformation, and to really draw a parallel here, we do a lot of work, for example, on device certification, on mobile device certification for the carriers. Now, if you go back in time, to onboard a device used to be a long process. Well, through automation, we have shortened that cycle, and now service providers can rapidly onboard new devices. So we're doing similar things from a VNF certification, really lowering the entry barrier, enabling higher level of experimentation, and getting service providers to bring different kinds of VNFs that they want to bring through the certification programs. And we're doing all this as a systems integrator with a comprehensive architectural vision. Three key pieces to that. The classical NFV, we are developing certain VNFs along with their VNF managers. More interestingly, we are doing work around SDN controllers, making enhancements to them, developing certain applications, monetization applications on the SDN controller, but also looking at it from a BSS OSS infrastructure perspective to really look at how that infrastructure needs to be migrated and to operationalize the hybrid networks, bringing in visualization, analytics, and more kind of capabilities. And to really show this in real work, one of the things, let me share with you, is what we have done as part of a catalyst project that we did at TM Forum. Our champions for this was AT&T, KDDI, and Orange. And what we did was, we took our virtualized EPC reference implementation. And in this case, we integrated that with an orchestrator, as well as the IBM, and in this case, we just partnered with IBM, but their NetCool suite, right? The key thing here was to operationalize, again, a hybrid network which had both physical and virtual network functions. How do we achieve fault management, and how do we achieve performance management? So, as part of this, we're through VM migration, we actually went through the whole process of really doing automated fault detection and fault recovery in a virtualized EPC scenario. And then for performance management, we were looking at different KQIs that we were monitoring, and if there was a breach on any quality indicator, we would initiate a closed loop control to scale out and augment capacity in a near real-time manner. And that was a use case for a hybrid network which had both physical network implementations of the EPC as well as virtualized EPC. And this we showcased, and I'm really pleased to share, this was one of the award-winning catalysts that we did. Part of to speed up this overall transformation and to really get these technologies into field, into deployment, and to really achieve the broader vision that the industry is laying out in terms of rapid innovation and really trying out different kinds of capabilities and services, we've putting a SDN NFV certification lab in place. We're working with service providers to develop certification criteria. And really then running that against different network functions, whether it's for interoperability, scalability, performance, efficiency testing, and more. And one of the other bigger things we are looking at is really putting the cost where it belongs. So from a business model perspective, also looking at vendor-funded business model to make sure that as these integration and certification exercises happen, the cost is put where it really belongs. And of course, as part of the certification lab, we have already brought in a number of open solutions, including OpenStack. We have Open Daylight and more already getting operationalized in these labs. Let me turn a little bit and share with you some of the work we are doing on SDN. And one of the things we did is, on Open Daylight, we looked at the SDN controller to build some interesting applications, infrastructure applications from a server load balancer to really looking at smart flow steering for different constraint-based path formation, be it latency or congestion and more. And the other thing we did was we developed a bandwidth on demand application for which we then exposed it, a RESTful API is northbound of it, and we layered a bandwidth calendaring. So not only through a portal could a user could come and really demand, put the bandwidth demands on the network, but through calendaring, then they could schedule their bandwidth needs as be. And we then took this to explore the art of possible. We tied this with Internet of Things, and we said, let's take a look at a camera. And we did a smart city use case. What we did was, we said, here's a city with a shared infrastructure and a shared network which has multiple cameras everywhere, generating video feeds, and sometimes, depending on traffic congestion, you could have jitter, you could have lower quality feeds being delivered. We loaded a image recognition application on the camera so it could detect fire, flood, blast, and event. And if an event would happen, in this case, it would come onto an SDN infrastructure in a real-time manner, again, telling the network to replumb, to reconfigure, and deliver fat pipes so that it could send high-quality video feeds. In this particular case, we were showing to emergency responders for a smart city use case where you could then, in a real time, deliver high-quality video feeds so that when they arrive. Now, this was really to bring out the power of really what Internet of Things, when married with SDN, really starts to enable from an infrastructure perspective. And then, last but not the least, let me share with you, how we as Tech Mahindra on an ongoing basis are working with the open source community through open source solutions and what we are doing. One of the things is we have partnered with ON Labs on the core program. And I think some of you who might have attended today morning's keynotes and presentation, this is the central office being re-architected as a data center, and the use case being around OLT. John Donovan talked about the AT&T Gigapower, where this is now getting into trials. So what we at Tech Mahindra are doing is we're working with ON Labs to really enable them to bring the initial pod that was shown last year and operationalizing it. And that means a lot of things. And I think this really starts to really show what it really means when we think about crossing the chasm and going past ideation. When we look at really deploying it, there are a number of things that are needed. Number of things including routing protocol extensions that need to be made, because you need this to interwork and interoperate with the existing infrastructure that is already sitting in the network. Number two, we also, as you might have heard about from the core talk today, if you look at the architecture, there's the pod built on merchant silicon servers as well as the leaf-spine fabric. But it also has the OLT MAC, where you have all your OLT terminations. Now, to manage that, it needs management interfaces. So we are, as part of that, developing the Yang model and adding netconf agents on that OLT MAC pizza box that is part of the core architecture. And then, of course, a lot of this then requires testing, integration with the existing infrastructure, including the existing BSS and OSS infrastructure. So what we have done is we're making contributions as part of this core program to really bring the overall technology out into from the initial pod that was deployed to deployment. So on that, I just really come to conclude the presentation here. But really I'd say is, we from a Tech Mahindra standpoint, we're making strategic investments in SDN NFV. We are embracing open source solutions. We are building applications on some of the open source SDN controllers. In case of Cord, we are working with the Cord community to really take it from an innovative solution into real implementation and deployment into the field. And to the community here, my request and call is that if you are working on open source programs or open source solutions that you see are ready and need to be taken into the service provider infrastructure and to be deployed, then we are really keen and eager to work with you to make sure that we really take some of these innovative solutions out from the innovation to implementation and deployment. Thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate that. Thank you.